Chapter 22: The Hutchinsonian Theory. The theory advanced by Brother William Hutchinson as to the origin and the progress of Freemasonry, in his treatise first published in the year 1775, and entitled The Spirit of Masonry, is so complicated and sometimes apparently so contradictory in its statements as to require, for a due comprehension of his views, not only a careful perusal, but even an exhaustive study of the work alluded to. After such a study, I think that I am able to present to the reader a correct summary of the opinions on the rise and progress of the order which were entertained by this learned scholar. Let it be said, by way of preface to this review, that however we may dissent from the conclusions of Hutchinson, he is entitled to our utmost respect for his scholarly attainments. To the study of the history and the philosophy of Masonry, he brought a fund of antiquarian research, in which he had previously been engaged in the examination of the ecclesiastical antiquities of the province of Durham. Of all the Masonic writers of the 18th century, Hutchinson was undoubtedly the most learned. And yet the theory that he has propounded as to the origin of the Masonic institution is altogether untenable, and indeed, in many of its details, absurd. Of all the opinions entertained by Hutchinson concerning the origin of Freemasonry, the most heterodox is that which denies its descent from and its connection, at any period, with an operative society. It is our opinion, he says, that Masons in the present state of Masonry were never a body of architects. We ground a judgment of the nature of our profession on our ceremonials, and flatter ourselves every Mason will be convinced that they have not relation to building and architecture, but are emblematical and imply moral and spiritual and religious tenets. Footnote: Spirit of Masonry, Lecture 13, page 131. In another place, while admitting that there were in former times builders of cities, towers, temples, and fortifications, he doubts that the artificers were formed into bodies ruled by their own proper laws, and knowing mysteries and secrets which were kept from the world. Footnote: Spirit of Masonry, Lecture 10, page 107. Since he admits, as we will see hereafter, that Masonry existed at the Temple of Solomon, that it was there organized in what he calls the second stage of its progress, and that the builders of the edifice were Masons, one would naturally imagine that Hutchinson would here encounter an insuperable objection to his theory, which entirely disconnects Masonry and architecture. But he attempts to obviate this difficulty by supposing that the principles of Freemasonry had, before the commencement of the undertaking, been communicated by King Solomon to the sages and religious men amongst his people. Footnote. Hutchinson's language is here somewhat confused, but it seems that this is the only rational interpretation that can be given to it. And that these chosen ones of Solomon, as a pious and holy duty, conducted the work. Their labors as builders were simply incidental, and they were no more to be regarded by reason of this duty as architects by profession than were Abel, Noah, Abraham, Jacob, Moses, and David by reason of the building of their altars, which were, like the temple, works of piety and devotion. Footnote. Spirit of Masonry, Lecture 10, page 108. This theory, in which all connection between operative and speculative Masonry is completely dissevered, and in which, in fact, the former is entirely ignored, is peculiar to Hutchinson. No other writer, no matter to what source he may have attributed the original rise of speculative Masonry, has denied that there was some period in the history of its progress when it was more or less intimately connected with the operative art. While, therefore, it is plain that the opinion of Hutchinson is in opposition to that of all other Masonic writers, it is equally evident that it contradicts all the well-established facts of history. But besides these opinions concerning the non-operative character of the institution, Hutchinson has been scarcely less peculiar in his other views in respect to the rise and progress of Freemasonry and its relations to other associations of antiquity. The Hutchinsonian theory may indeed be regarded as especially and exclusively his own. It is therefore worthy of consideration and review, rather in reference to the novelty of his ideas than in respect to anything of great value in the pseudo-historical statements that he has advanced. The prominent thought of Hutchinson in developing his theory is that Masonry in its progress, from the earliest times of antiquity to the present day, has been divided into three stages, respectively represented by the three ancient craft degrees. Footnote. It is known to the world, but more particularly to the brethren, that there are 3 degrees of Masons: apprentices, craftsmen, and masters. Their initiation, and the several advancements from the order of apprentices, will necessarily lead us to observations in these distinct channels. Spirit of Masonry, Lecture 1, page 1. He does not give a very lucid or satisfactory explanation of the reasons which induced him to connect each of these stages of progress with one of the symbolical degrees, and indeed the connection appears to be based upon a rather fanciful hypothesis. The 3 stages into which he divides the progress of Masonry from its birth onwards to modern times are distinguished from each other and distinctively marked by the code of religious ethics professed and taught by each. The first stage, which is represented by the entered apprentice degree, commences with Adam and the Garden of Eden, and extends to the time of Moses. The religious code taught in this first stage of Masonry was confined to a knowledge of the God of nature and that acceptable service wherewith he was well pleased. Footnote. Spirit of Masonry, Lecture 1, page 6. To Adam, while in a state of innocence, this knowledge was imparted, as well as that of all the science and learning which existed in the earliest ages of the world. When our first parent fell, although he lost his innocence, he still retained the memory of all that he had been taught while in the Garden of Eden. This very retention was, indeed, a portion of the punishment incurred for his disobedience. It, however, enabled him to communicate to his children the sciences which he had comprehended in Eden, and the knowledge that he had acquired of nature and the God of nature. By them, these lessons were transmitted to their descendants as the cornerstone and foundation of Masonry, whose teachings at that early period consisted of a belief in the God of nature and a knowledge of the sciences as they had been transmitted by Adam to his posterity. This system appears to have been very nearly the same as that afterward called by Dr. Oliver the pure Freemasonry of antiquity. All of the descendants of Adam did not, however, retain this purity and simplicity of dogma. After the deluge, when mankind became separated, the lessons which had been taught by the antediluvians fell into confusion and oblivion, and were corrupted by many peoples, so that the service of the true God, which had been taught in the pure masonry of the first men, was defiled by idolatry. These seceders from the pure Adamic masonry formed institutions of their own, and degenerated as the first deviation from the simple worship of the God of nature into the errors of Sabaism, or the adoration of the sun, moon, and stars. They adopted symbols and allegories with which to teach esoterically their false doctrines. The earliest of these seceders were the Egyptians, whose priests secreted the mysteries of their religion from the multitude by symbols and hieroglyphics that were comprehensible to the members of their own order only. A similar system was adopted by the priests of Greece and Rome when they established their peculiar mysteries. These examples of conveying truth by symbolic methods of teaching were wisely followed by the Masons for the purpose of concealing their own mysteries. From this, we naturally make the deduction, although Hutchinson does not expressly say so, that according to his theory, Masonry was at that early period merely a religious profession whose principles, maxims, language, learning, and religion were derived from Eden, from the patriarchs, and from the sages of the East, and that the symbolism which now forms so essential an element of the system, was not an original characteristic of it, but was borrowed, at a later period, from the mystical and religious associations of the pagans. Footnote.